The sound of silence. Imagine winning the lottery, holding the winning ticket in your hand, and looking annoyed. That is exactly what the WNBA feels like right now. For 27 years, this league has been begging for this specific moment. They fought for relevance, pleaded for coverage, and demanded respect. Then, finally, the floodgates opened. Ratings tripled, arenas sold out, and the entire sports world turned its eyes to women's basketball. By every metric, this should be the biggest party in the league's history. But if you listen closely, you won't hear champagne popping in the front office. You hear silence. And that silence is deafening. Behind the sold-out crowds and the viral highlights, insiders are reporting something uncomfortable. Instead of riding the wave, leadership seems paralyzed by it. A major commercial drops cinematic, powerful, and featuring the biggest star in the sport, and the reaction from the top wasn't a victory lap. It was frustration. When a business gets exactly what it prayed for and reacts with irritation instead of celebration, it forces us to ask a terrifying question. Is the WNBA actually afraid of its own success? Or are they just afraid of who is bringing it to them? At the center of all this tension is Caitlin Clark, a player whose impact on women's basketball goes far beyond what happens on the court. The commercial itself wasn't some wild, controversial piece of content. It wasn't pushing boundaries or making bold political statements. It was exactly what any major sports league dreams of having. Polished production value, confident pacing, sharp visuals that grab your attention, and one unmistakable message. This player isn't just another face in the crowd. She's a legitimate reason to tune in. This is the kind of content that tells casual fans who've never watched a WNBA game in their lives that this matters, that they should be paying attention. In most professional sports environments, an advertisement like this would be treated like found gold. Leagues typically rush to amplify it, repost it across every platform, and wrap their entire brand around the momentum it creates. But this time, something felt off. The temperature didn't rise in celebration, it rose in discomfort. According to reports circulating among media personalities and league insiders, the reaction inside WNBA offices wasn't strategic excitement or plans to capitalize on the moment. It was frustration. Some commentators have even suggested it bordered on anger, not because the commercial was poorly executed or sent the wrong message, but because of what it represented. And that's a crucial distinction, because being upset about what something symbolizes is fundamentally different from being upset about performance or quality. The symbolism was crystal clear the moment that ad hit screens. Caitlin Clark wasn't being presented as just another talented player wearing a team jersey. She was positioned as the main attraction, the gravitational center pulling everyone's attention, someone capable of drawing eyes without the league acting as a gatekeeper or middleman. For fans, that's exciting and refreshing. For sponsors, it's exactly what they're looking for. But for an organization that's used to controlling how stars are packaged and presented, it can feel like losing control of the steering wheel while the car is still speeding down the highway. For years, the WNBA has operated on a very specific philosophy, one that's been repeated so many times it's become woven into the league's DNA. The message has always been consistent and clear. This is bigger than any one player. The focus should be on the collective, on the history that's been built, on the sisterhood and unity that defines women's basketball. Individual greatness absolutely mattered, but it was always supposed to fit neatly inside a larger, carefully balanced system where no single person overshadowed the whole. That approach wasn't some accident or oversight. It was a deliberate strategy constructed over decades, and the logic behind it made sense on the surface. When a league is still fighting just to stay visible, leaning too heavily on a single face can feel incredibly risky. What happens if that player gets injured, retires early, or simply fades from the spotlight? By selling the collective instead of the individual, the league was trying to protect itself from becoming dependent on one person. The problem is that sports don't actually work that way, especially not in today's media landscape where attention spans are short and competition for eyeballs is brutal. Fans don't fall in love with logos, mission statements, or abstract concepts about teamwork. They connect with personalities, with unforgettable moments, with players who feel genuinely different from everyone else. They choose their stars organically, whether the institution approves of those choices or not. And this is where the friction really started building. The league kept pushing this system-focused narrative, keep insisting that everyone should appreciate the whole rather than fixate on individuals, while audiences were naturally gravitating towards standout talent and individual brilliance. That gap between what leadership wanted people to care about and what fans actually responded to kept getting wider. It was quiet at first, easy to ignore or explain away, but then it became impossible to miss. When Caitlin Clark entered the professional picture, that entire philosophy was suddenly put under an intense microscope, and the cracks in the foundation became visible to everyone watching. What really intensified this entire situation wasn't just that the commercial existed, but who created it and how effortlessly it seemed to land with audiences. Major sponsors stepped in and accomplished in a matter of seconds what the league itself had been struggling to do for years. Clean, compelling storytelling, modern pacing that feels current and relevant, a clear sense of scale and importance. The advertisement didn't feel like some experimental test or a favor being done for a struggling league. It felt confident, polished, and intentional. The kind of high-end branding that's usually reserved for athletes who are already sitting at the absolute top of their sport, the LeBrons and Serenas of the world. That contrast was impossible for anyone paying attention to ignore, and it created an uncomfortable comparison that nobody in league offices wanted to confront. On one side, you had outside companies treating women's basketball like a premium product worthy of cinematic visuals and primetime placement. They were investing real money and creative resources because they saw genuine value and audience potential. On the other side, the league's own marketing often felt safer, more cautious, and frankly stuck in an older era of sports promotion that doesn't resonate with modern audiences. Analysts didn't even need to spell this out directly because viewers could see the gap with their own eyes. These sponsors weren't just promoting an individual player for their own benefit. They were inadvertently demonstrating what the entire sport could look like when it's sold without hesitation, without fear, without constantly second-guessing whether the audience is ready for bold storytelling. And once people saw that version of women's basketball, polished and presented with total confidence, it became nearly impossible to accept anything less. The sponsors had accidentally raised the bar, and now everyone was wondering why the league itself hadn't been operating at that level all along. One of the most uncomfortable ideas that started surfacing in commentary around this situation is the suggestion that organizational culture doesn't stop at the boardroom door. In professional sports, the tone set by leadership has a way of seeping into everything, trickling down through every level of the organization, even when nothing is explicitly said in public statements or official memos. Analysts and observers have pointed out that players, coaches, referees, and officials are incredibly sensitive to what gets emphasized by leadership, what gets protected, and what quietly gets brushed aside or ignored. When the people at the top of an organization appear uneasy or uncomfortable about a certain player's spotlight, that unease doesn't stay isolated in executive offices for very long. It spreads, subtly influencing how everyone else perceives and treats that player. This is where the concept of permission structures enters the conversation, and it's critical to understand. This isn't about direct orders being issued or explicit instructions being given to treat someone differently. It's about signals and what those signals communicate. Who gets defended quickly and forcefully when controversy hits? Who gets promoted loudly across official channels? Who receives nothing but silence when they're on the receiving end of questionable treatment? Commentators discussing this situation have stressed that in elite sports environments, those signals absolutely shape behavior throughout the entire ecosystem. When institutional protection feels inconsistent or selectively applied, it creates the impression that certain boundaries are softer than they should be, that certain players don't have the same invisible shield around them that others enjoy. And once that impression takes hold, people start testing those boundaries to see exactly how far they can push before anyone steps in to stop them. What made this situation impossible for fans and media to ignore wasn't public backlash or critical statements from the league directed at the commercial. It was the complete absence of anything at all. No reposts on official league's social media account. No celebratory captions acknowledging the moment. No visible recognition that one of their own players had just landed a massive mainstream cultural moment that should benefit everyone. In an era where professional sports leagues treat social media amplification like oxygen, where every small achievement gets posted and celebrated. That kind of deliberate quiet stands out immediately and unmistakably. Fans noticed the silence before analysts and commentators ever started weighing in, because in modern sports media culture, saying nothing almost always carries meaning. In most professional leagues, star-driven moments are treated as shared victories that lift everyone involved. When a player lands a massive endorsement deal or drops a high-profile campaign that goes viral, the league instinctively wraps its arms around that success because it understands a fundamental truth: attention for one player becomes attention for the entire sport. That's exactly how the NBA operates, and it's a big reason why their biggest stars consistently feel publicly supported by the league, even when personal controversies arise. Promotion and amplification aren't optional there. They're reflexive, built into the DNA of how the organization operates. The contrast felt incredibly sharp once fans started comparing that approach to what they were witnessing with the WNBA. Caitlin Clark was everywhere on television, screens, magazine covers, and viral social media posts. Yet, she was barely visible on official league channels during that exact same window. That disconnect wasn't subtle, and it raised questions that leadership seemed completely unprepared to answer in any satisfying way. Once the conversation around this situation really picked up momentum, it was only a matter of time before it landed squarely on money, not contracts or salary cap numbers in the traditional sense that sports fans are used to debating, but something far more uncomfortable for league leadership to address. Every major commercial that drops, every premium brand partnership announcement quietly reminds the viewing public that there's a massive, glaring disconnect between how much tangible value certain players are generating in the marketplace and how little the league itself is actually able to compensate them financially. And nothing exposes a broken or outdated business model faster than visible success that you didn't directly create, don't fully control, and can't seem to capitalize on effectively. When viewers see Caitlin Clark fronting national advertising campaigns for major brands, they're not just seeing a star athlete doing what stars do. They're seeing leverage. They're seeing someone pulling in substantial revenue streams that absolutely dwarf her official league paycheck. And that observation naturally leads casual fans to start asking questions they never used to ask before. Questions like, why? If this particular player is driving sold-out arenas, significantly higher television ratings, and genuine cultural buzz that extends far beyond traditional basketball audiences, does the league still struggle so much financially? Why does the economic upside feel so completely disconnected from the spectacle and excitement that everyone is witnessing? Commentators have suggested that this is precisely where institutional discomfort transforms into defensiveness, because every high-end endorsement deal becomes an accidental audit of the league's economic structure. It invites comparisons that leadership would much rather avoid. Comparisons between endorsement money and actual salaries, between brand-driven momentum and institutional stagnation that's becoming harder to deny or explain away. When tension like this builds and festers inside an organization, it inevitably starts to concentrate around one central figure, not necessarily because that person controls every single detail or makes every decision, but because they symbolize the direction of the organization and become the face of its response to pressure. In this case, that spotlight falls directly on Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner who was brought in specifically to modernize the WNBA and steer it through what was supposed to be a transformative new phase of growth and expansion. Her background wasn't deeply rooted in basketball culture or sports tradition as much as it was in corporate leadership and business management, and that context matters enormously when evaluating how this particular moment is being perceived by players, fans, and media alike. Engelbert was hired with clear expectations: bring stability, implement better structure, and apply business discipline to a league that had long operated more as a cause-driven enterprise than a purely competitive sports product. The goal was to scale the WNBA, improve revenue streams, and make the entire operation financially sustainable without constant external support. But the meteoric rise of Caitlin Clark has accelerated everything at a pace that no strategic plan could have possibly predicted or prepared for. And when growth dramatically outpaces governance structures, when reality moves faster than planning committees can meet, leadership inevitably ends up in a reactive position instead of a directing one. Commentators analyzing this situation have been careful not to frame this as personal animosity or individual failure, but rather as something more structural and systemic. Clark's star power and independent appeal have starkly exposed how limited the league's existing tools and strategies really are, and the commissioner suddenly finds herself being measured not against past WNBA leadership or reasonable benchmarks, but against outside brands, viral, cultural reach, and global attention that she simply doesn't fully control no matter what decision she makes. What makes this moment so fundamentally destabilizing for traditional sports structures is that it isn't just about popularity, publicity, or having a recognizable face to put on promotional materials. It's about leverage, actual power in the relationship between player and institution. And leverage is the one thing professional sports leagues have been accustomed to controlling completely for decades. For generations, the formula was straightforward and rarely challenged. Players needed the league for exposure, for legitimacy, for income, and career stability. The organization held all the important cards, and stars, no matter how talented or popular they became, still operated within that established framework. What's happening right now doesn't fit that traditional model at all. And that's exactly why it feels so profoundly uncomfortable for people invested in the old way of doing things to acknowledge out loud. From the moment Caitlin Clark entered the professional ranks, it was immediately obvious to anyone paying attention that she arrived with something most rookies simply don't have. She didn't need the league to introduce her to the public or build her platform from scratch. The audience was already there. Millions of invested fans who had followed her journey from college and were ready to keep watching. Major brands recognized that reality instantly and moved accordingly. That fundamental fact meant the WNBA wasn't creating her platform or manufacturing her appeal. At best, it was inheriting something that already existed and was already powerful. And inheriting power is profoundly different from building it yourself, because when you build something, you control it. But when you inherit it, you're constantly negotiating with forces you didn't create. This dynamic is incredibly rare in professional sports, and it changes everything about how the relationship between player and league actually functions. Instead of climbing the traditional ladder one rung at a time, Clark essentially stepped onto a completely different economic plane where her visibility exists beyond league broadcasts, her market extends past official channels, and her cultural relevance continues whether the league amplifies it or not. All of this analysis, all of these observations and uncomfortable questions lead us to one unavoidable conclusion. Right now, at this very moment, the WNBA is standing at a genuine crossroads. And the path leadership chooses will define not just the next season, but the entire next decade of women's professional basketball. On one side is a path of growth through alignment, through embracing momentum instead of resisting it, through letting success breathe and expand even when it arrives faster and louder than anyone planned or expected. This path means recognizing that a breakout superstar doesn't erase the league's history or diminish past achievements. It validates them. It proves that everything that came before was worth it. That path requires real humility, genuine adaptability, and a willingness to let the spotlight shine exactly where the audience is already looking instead of trying to redirect it to fit a predetermined plan. The other path is harder to defend publicly, but psychologically easier for traditional institutions to fall into. It's the path of control, of quiet resistance, of trying to minimize what can't be easily managed, in the hope that balance will eventually restore itself naturally. History shows us exactly where that road leads. Lost opportunities that never come back around. Fractured trust between players and leadership that's nearly impossible to rebuild. And eventually, stars who decide their energy, their prime years, and their leverage are better spent somewhere else, anywhere else that actually appreciates what they bring. Once resentment replaces celebration at the institutional level, it becomes almost impossible to fake unity convincingly, and fans are far too perceptive to buy it when organizations try. The decisions being made right now, the silences, the hesitations, the behind-the-scenes reactions that people whisper about, all of it will shape how this era is remembered. Not because of one commercial or one endorsement deal, but because of what this moment revealed about who the league really serves and what it actually values when success finally arrives. If this deep dive opened your eyes to what's really happening behind the scenes, I need you to hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who follows women's basketball, and drop your honest thoughts in the comments because I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss when we break down the stories that everyone else is afraid to talk about. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.